Before trying to assess the viability of a would-be peace deal today, counting the cost of war in Kharkiv last night. According to officials in Ukraine's second city, 4 people died as a result of these drone strikes, 13 injured, 8 homes, a school and power lines damaged. Earlier today on social media, Donald Trump dangled the possibility of a breakthrough on peace talks, but then added, "Don't believe it until you see it." And on that last point, at least, 67-year-old Alexander Voropev agrees.
We
don't believe in peace negotiations, because while politicians sit at the negotiating table with a pen, we're hit by missiles and bombs. People die. A woman was killed today. Her remains were only just retrieved now.
Today, addressing the Swedish Parliament, Volodymyr Zelenskyy acknowledged some progress in talks over the weekend in Geneva, but his key message, Ukrainian sovereignty, is non-negotiable.
There is a lot of noise in the media, a lot of political pressure, and even greater responsibility for the decisions ahead. Putin wants legal recognition for what he has stolen, to break the principle of territorial integrity and sovereignty. And that's the main problem.
EU leaders, blindsided by the surprise US peace plan last week, are now asserting themselves. At a meeting in Angola today, walking that tightrope between not raining on Trump's diplomatic parade, but also holding the line on Ukraine.
Ukraine's territory and sovereignty must be respected. Only Ukraine, as a sovereign country, can make decisions regarding its armed forces. The choice of their destiny is in their own hands.
The initial US plan last week spoke about Ukraine reducing the size of its army and relinquishing its claim on the 20% of the country Russia has occupied. But the Europeans have a counter-proposal now on the table. It's reported that the European version rejects the idea of restricting NATO enlargement, for example. The language around security guarantees for Ukraine is more robust. And it allows a significantly larger Ukrainian army than the US version from earlier in the week. It's been a dizzying 7 days of diplomacy. The original 28-point peace plan was leaked last week, drafted in Miami by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner in conversation with Putin ally Kirill Dmitriev. It was basically a Russian wish list. Enough sticking points for Ukraine might as well have been drafted on flypaper. A US Army delegation arrived in Kyiv on the 19th of November to discuss the plan with Zelenskyy. Donald Trump tells Fox News that Thanksgiving Day this Thursday would be a good time for the Ukrainians to accept the deadline. Then the pushback. Technical talks began in Geneva, involving the US, Ukraine and European partners. On the US side, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, becomes much more involved. Which brings us to today's diplomatic tug-of-war between the US and European proposal. In the last few hours, the Kremlin spokesperson said Moscow hadn't yet received anything official by way of a counter-proposal. When they do, as things stand, the world may not be much closer to a ceasefire than we were this time last week.
Ulrike Brown there, where we can speak now to the former Danish Prime Minister and former Secretary-General of NATO, Anders Fogh Rasmussen. Thanks very much for joining us. I mean, how alarming was it to see a plan which looks like it was largely formulated by Russia, adopted by the US and foisted on Ukraine?
It was indeed very alarming. It's important to understand the 28-point plan is not a peace plan. It is a capitulation document. It is a blueprint for Trump defeat and Putin win, and that's why it has to be changed fundamentally.
And who must be the architect of that change? Because you said recently that Europe must stop being a commentator and become an actor. At what point does Europe have to accept that Trump keeps circling back to Moscow's demands and really assert themselves?
I think it's high time that Europe takes the initiative and do not be preoccupied by the thinking in the White House. Europe must step forward robustly and play hard power politics, which means give robust security guarantees to Ukraine, backed up by troop presence in Ukraine, and secondly, unlock frozen Russian assets for Ukraine.
But that troop presence that you talk about in Ukraine, how does that work?
Well, a European troop presence in Ukraine should not be on the front line. The front line will still be the Ukrainian army. But behind the lines, Europe could and should deploy troops to defend population centers, civilian infrastructure, etc. My estimate would be that we would need 20,000 European troops. We could start with a smaller figure, but end goal should be 20,000. In addition to that, we will need 150 combat aircraft, and we should establish an air shield to protect key cities in Ukraine.
But can this be done without some form of help or backing from the US? Would Europe have enough troops to do that?
We do have enough assets to do that, but obviously the deterrent effect would be much stronger if the US would back up such a European reassurance force by intelligence sharing, space surveillance, aircraft, transport, etc. So that would clearly be the goal, to get an American backup. But my point would be that even in the case that the US will not step up, the Europeans must do so.
I mean, given the original peace plan so clearly reflecting Russian demands, are any US security guarantees worth anything?
Yes, but only if they are backed up by a concrete troop presence. The fact is that Putin doesn't care about paper guarantees. It's only guarantees backed up by a concrete military presence that he will respect. So time has come for Europe to change statements to soldiers.
I mean, you've been talking about that for quite a while. Do you get any sense that Europe is ready to step up? You know, there's a delicate balance. We heard the Polish Prime Minister say no one wants to discourage the American president from having the United States on our side in this process. They're nervous still, aren't they?
Obviously, it is a balancing act, and I appreciate all the efforts from the American side to push for initiating a peace process. But we in Europe, we must do our own work. I find it quite embarrassing that the Europeans are begging and asking for a seat at the table. We should have a seat at the table because we're indispensable. And the way to make yourself indispensable would be to bring something to the table. And that should be concrete security guarantees for Ukraine.
Anders Fogh Rasmussen, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.